Close your eyes for a moment. Not literally, keep reading, but close the part of your mind that deals in logic and probability and the measurable, verifiable facts of the world as it actually is. Close that part down just for a little while and open the other part. The part that remembers what it felt like to be very small in a very large world. The part that remembers believing, with complete and unquestioned conviction, that something extraordinary was possible just beyond the edge of what you could see. The part that knew, not thought, not hoped, but knew, that the darkness outside your window was not simply darkness but something alive. Something watching. Something that had not yet decided whether it was friend or enemy. That part of you. That child part. That's the part this story was written for. The BFG. Those 3 letters have meant something to generations of children and to the adults those children became. They represent one of the most beloved stories in the history of children's literature. A story that came from the mind of Roald Dahl, which is to say it came from one of the most particular and peculiar and profoundly strange imaginations that the 20th century produced. Dahl was not a writer who wrote down to children. He was a writer who understood that children are, in certain essential ways, more honest about the world than adults, more willing to sit with its darkness, more capable of finding delight in the genuinely weird, more open to the possibility that the rules everyone has agreed to follow might not be the only rules available. He wrote the BFG in 1982, and he dedicated it to his daughter Olivia, who had died 20 years earlier at the age of 7 from measles encephalitis. And knowing that this story about a giant who catches dreams and a little girl who is taken from her bed in the middle of the night and carried to a world of wonder and strangeness and genuine danger, knowing that it was written by a father for a daughter he had lost, gives the whole thing a quality that is hard to articulate but impossible to unfeel. It is tender in a way that tenderness between parents and children is tender. It is specific. It is not the generalized warmth of a story that loves children in the abstract. It is a story that loves one particular child, fiercely and specifically, and through that specificity manages to love all children who have ever been small and frightened and full of wondering. Steven Spielberg adapted it for cinema in 2016. And if there is a more appropriate pairing of story and filmmaker in the history of cinema than Roald Dahl's BFG and Steven Spielberg, I cannot immediately name it. Because Spielberg has always been, at his most fundamental creative level, a filmmaker who is interested in the experience of being a child in a world built for and controlled by adults. E.T. Close Encounters. Even Jurassic Park, which is ostensibly about dinosaurs, is really about children and parents and the terrifying experience of being small in the presence of something enormous that could either protect you or destroy you. Spielberg knows this territory the way some people know their home neighborhood, without thinking about it, without needing a map, with an instinctive fluency that comes from having spent his entire creative life in it. He also brought John Williams back to score it. Which is relevant. Which is more than relevant. Because John Williams writing music for a Spielberg film about a child and a giant and the magic of dreams is not merely a creative collaboration. It is a specific frequency of wonder that has existed since 1977 and that, when it starts playing in a darkened theater, does something to your chest that no other music quite replicates. And Ruby Barnhill playing Sophie. And Mark Rylance playing the BFG. These two people together on screen in this story. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. We are standing at the edge of giant country and running toward it too fast. We need to slow down. We need to start in the dark. Sophie cannot sleep. This is the first thing the film shows us, and it is the first thing the story has always shown us across every version because it is the essential premise. A child awake in the middle of the night when all the rest of the world is asleep. There is something specific about 3 o'clock in the morning, the witching hour as the story calls it, that Dahl understood instinctively and that Spielberg renders with absolute precision. The city outside the orphanage window is not the city of the day. It is a different city entirely. Darker, quieter, more alive in ways that daylight makes invisible. The streets are empty in the specific way that city streets are empty at that hour, not abandoned because abandoned implies someone chose to leave but suspended, as if the world is holding its breath. Sophie is small. Ruby Barnhill plays her with enormous eyes behind enormous glasses, and those eyes are doing most of the work of establishing who Sophie is in the film's first minutes. She is curious, these eyes say. She is watchful. She is the kind of child who notices things that others don't, who keeps her observations private most of the time because she has learned, in the specific, survivalist way that children in institutions learn, That the things you say out loud are the things that can be taken from you or used against you, while the things you keep inside are still yours. She reads. She watches the world outside her window. She knows, with the specific knowledge of someone who has spent a great deal of time in the quiet, that 3 o'clock in the morning is when the extraordinary is most likely to appear. And then she sees it. The hand comes first. A hand the size of a dining table, reaching around the corner of a building. Feeling its way along the brickwork with the careful, almost apologetic caution of something enormous trying very hard to be small. And then the figure. And this first appearance of the BFG, is one of the most carefully designed sequences in the film because Spielberg knows, as he has always known, that anticipation is the most powerful tool in cinema. He gives us pieces of the giant before he gives us the whole. The hand. The outline of a head above a roofline. The impossible length of a leg. The way the streetlight catches something, an eye, perhaps, vast and pale and watching, before the figure moves back into shadow. Sophie sees this and does what any sensible person would do at 3 in the morning when they look out their window and see something that should not exist. She ducks behind her curtain. But she looks back. Because she cannot not look back. Because that is who Sophie is. Because the curiosity is stronger than the fear, and this, the film is telling us from the very beginning, is the thing that matters about this particular child. Her willingness to look at what is frightening rather than away from it. The giant sees her looking. And here is where the story's first turning point arrives, and it arrives with a speed that the film handles perfectly. The BFG, this enormous, impossible nighttime wandering giant, does not ignore Sophie, does not move on. He reaches down through her window, and with a hand that could crush her without effort, he picks her up, wraps her in her blanket, tucks her under his arm and runs. The running sequence is extraordinary. The city blurs past at ground level and then, as the BFG stride lengthens at impossible speed, the buildings becoming streaks of light, the road becoming a gray ribbon, the world Sophie has known her entire life shrinking behind her as the darkness and the countryside open up ahead. She is terrified. She is screaming, though her screaming is largely lost in the wind. And the giant is running with his head down and his eyes forward and his enormously long legs eating miles the way you or I might eat steps. And there is something in the quality of his running, not aggressive, not predatory, but urgent in a way that seems almost panicked, that tells you, if you are watching carefully, that the giant is as frightened as the child he is carrying. That this is not a triumphant predator with his prey. This is someone who made a decision in a moment of fear and is now committed to the consequences of it. Giant country. The landscape they arrive in is one of the most visually original environments in the film's considerable visual vocabulary. It is the English countryside taken to an extreme, all mist and ancient rock and grass so green it seems almost aggressive, and cliffs that drop away into nothing, and a quality of light that is different from any light you have seen anywhere else, as if the rules that govern how light behaves in the ordinary world have been subtly rewritten here. Spielberg and his cinematographer Janusz Kaminski, who has been creating the visual language of Spielberg's films for decades, who knows exactly what this director needs from an image and exactly how to provide it, have built Giant Country as a place that exists just slightly outside the physics of anywhere you have ever been. Not fantasy world different. Not a cartoon landscape. But heightened. Saturated. Real in all the ways that matter and magical in the specific ways that the story requires. The BFG's cave is enormous in the way that everything in Giant Country is enormous. Scaled for creatures that are 20, 30, 40 feet tall. But it is also, surprisingly, intimate. Homey in a strange way. There are jars, hundreds of jars, thousands of jars stacked from floor to ceiling like a vast, luminous library, each one containing a dream. A captured, contained, living dream. The light that comes from them is pale gold and shifting and has the quality of the light you see on the inside of your eyelids when the sun is bright and your eyes are closed. It is the warmest, most beautiful, most completely impractical room you have ever seen, and it is everything you need to know about the BFG immediately. This is a giant who catches dreams. Not nightmares. Not fear. Dreams. The good ones, the strange ones, the ones that don't quite make sense but leave you feeling, upon waking, as if something important happened that you can't quite name. He catches them in the wild places, wherever dreams originate, whatever country they come from before they find their way to sleeping human heads. And he keeps them, and he studies them, and he sends the good ones to children. This is what he does. In a world full of giants who eat people, the BFG catches dreams for children. Mark Rylance's performance as the BFG is the film's central achievement and its greatest gift. Rylance is, by common critical consensus, one of the greatest stage actors of his generation. His work in theater, particularly with Shakespeare, has been described with words like transcendent and once in a generation, so often that the words have become almost inadequate. What he does with the BFG is something that has almost no precedent in terms of technical achievement. The character was created entirely through performance capture, with Rylance acting in a suit covered in tracking markers on a set designed to allow him to interact physically with Ruby Barnhill's Sophie, while the technology recorded every movement, every micro-expression, every gesture and caught breath and unconscious physical habit, and translated all of it into the animated giant that appears on screen. The result is something that doesn't feel like animation. It feels like a person. It feels, more specifically, like Mark Rylance, because that is precisely what it is. The BFG is Rylance in every detail that matters. The way he holds his head when he is uncertain. The way his enormous hands move when he is thinking, touching things with a gentleness that is almost painful to watch given the force they could deploy. The way his eyes, those vast, pale, extraordinary eyes, focus on Sophie with an attention that is at once overwhelming and completely non-threatening. He looks at her the way you look at something that you didn't expect to encounter and that turned out to be far more interesting than anything you could have anticipated, with the specific quality of attention that is, in the deepest sense, respect. The BFG speech is one of the story's most famous features. He speaks in what Dahl called gobblefunk, a language that is English but not quite, filled with invented words and magnificent malapropisms and the specific, distinctive poetry of someone for whom language was never quite the right size. Words slip and slide and transform, human beings for human beings, wispopping for flatulence, scrumdiddlyumptious for delicious, fizzwizard for a wonderful dream. The BFG explains this himself with a kind of rueful self-awareness that makes him even more endearing. He never went to school. He taught himself to read from a single book, a very long, very strange book about a human who was also, in his way, a giant. And so his entire relationship with language is filtered through that one eccentric source. Rylance speaks the gobblefunk as if it is the most natural thing in the world. He never plays it for comedy, never lets it become a performance of quirkiness. He speaks it the way someone speaks their native language, with complete comfort, with genuine expression, with a full range of emotion that language can carry when it is truly yours. And the result is that the gobblefunk stops being funny, though it is often funny, and starts being something more interesting, an entire inner world made audible. A way of being in language that is particular to this one being, shaped by his specific history and his specific solitude and his specific, extraordinary life. Sophie, in the cave in the middle of the night, surrounded by jars of captured dreams and the enormous gentle presence of her captor, asks the question that is the film's emotional engine. She asks, "Why did you take me?" And the BFG is quiet for a moment. He is quiet in the way that people are quiet when the honest answer to a question is something they haven't fully worked out yet. He says, "You saw me. On the street. You saw me and I couldn't let you tell anyone." Sophie says, "You could have just left. I wouldn't have told anyone." He says, "Little girl, I could not know that." She says, "You could have asked." And he has no answer for this. Because she is right. He could have asked. He didn't. He panicked, in whatever form panic takes in a being who has lived alone for longer than she can imagine, and he made the safest possible choice from his own perspective and the most frightening possible choice from hers. And the fact that he can hear her saying "you could have asked," that he doesn't deflect it or dismiss it but simply holds it, with the expression of someone receiving a true thing, is the first evidence of who the BFG fundamentally is. He is honest. He is capable of receiving correction. He is not too proud or too frightened to admit when he has done something wrong. Sophie says, "Are you going to eat me?" He says, "I is not eating people. Giants is eating people. I is not that kind of giant." She says, "What kind of giant are you then?" He says, "I is the big friendly giant. I is the BFG." And she looks at him. For a long moment. With those enormous eyes behind those enormous glasses. And she decides. You can see the decision happen. Not because the film makes a production of it, but because Ruby Barnhill plays the moment with complete honesty. She is looking at this impossible creature and she is doing what Sophie always does. She is observing carefully, collecting every piece of available evidence, and arriving at a conclusion that is more felt than calculated but is no less real for that. She decides that he is telling the truth. She decides that she is safe. She says, well then, I suppose we should get to know each other. And the BFG, who has been alone in Giant Country for longer than he can remember in any way that feels real, who has not had a conversation with anyone who was not a predator or a dream since a time that exists in him more as a quality of feeling than as a specific memory, the BFG looks at this small human child who has decided to trust him, and something in his enormous face does something that it has not done in a very long time. He smiles. The days that follow, the education in each other's worlds, the gradual building of trust and friendship and something that neither of them has the right word for, though Sophie might eventually call it family, are the film's middle section, and they are handled with a delicacy and a joy that I find genuinely difficult to describe without undervaluing. It is easy to make friendship seem easy in film. It is much harder to make the building of friendship feel earned, to show the specific, awkward, tentative, occasionally frustrating process by which two very different beings learn to be comfortable with each other. Spielberg does this. The film does this. Through a series of scenes that are individually small and collectively enormous. The dream-catching sequence. This is the BFG's primary occupation, and the film gives it a visual treatment that is among the most beautiful sequences Spielberg has ever created. Dreams, in the world of the BFG, are physical things, not metaphors, not symbols, but actual small creatures that exist in a specific place between night and day, between sleep and waking, that can be caught and kept and studied and eventually dispatched to the sleeping heads of deserving children. They look different from anything you've seen in any other film. They have color and weight and a quality of movement that is simultaneously transparent and solid. They drift and spiral. They respond to the landscape around them. They are alive in the way that truly wild things are alive, completely indifferent to being observed, existing entirely in their own terms. The BFG catches them with his net and his jars and a patience that is clearly the product of centuries of practice. He moves through the dreamscape, a landscape that exists in a different dimension from Giant Country, accessible only at a specific intersection of time and space that the BFG navigates with the fluency of long familiarity, with the careful attention of a naturalist in a rare ecosystem. He does not rush. He does not force. He waits for the right moment, reads the movement and the quality and the particular character of each dream, and when the moment comes, he acts with a speed and a precision that is completely at odds with his general impression of gentle slowness. Sophie watches all of this. She is not allowed to help at first. The dreams are fragile, and the consequences of a wrong move in the dreamscape are unpredictable and potentially irreversible. But she watches. And the watching is itself an education, not just in the mechanics of dream catching but in the BFG. In the way he inhabits his work. In the care he brings to it. In the particular quality of his attention. Reverent, without any self-consciousness, completely absorbed, that tells her, more than any conversation could, what kind of being this is. There is a dream that goes wrong. A small one, a child's dream of flying, joyful and ordinary and completely harmless, that escapes the net and drifts in a direction that the BFG did not intend. He goes still. Watches it go. And the expression on his face, Rylance's face translated perfectly through the performance capture, is the expression of someone watching something irreplaceable become unreachable. Not devastation. Just a quiet, specific sadness. The particular sadness of someone accustomed to losing things and not yet, even after all the years, entirely accustomed to the feeling. Sophie says, "Can you get it back?" He says, "Some dreams when they is gone is gone." She says, "Was it a good one?" He says, "They is all good ones. Every dream, even the small ordinary ones, is a good one when you is a child who needs it." This is the line that tells you everything about the BFG's moral universe. Everything. Every dream is good. Every child deserves them. The distribution of wonder is not a matter of merit or worthiness or any hierarchy of who deserves to feel, for a few sleeping hours, that the world is extraordinary. Every child. All of them. This is not sentiment. It is, for the BFG, a working philosophy. A practical ethic. The reason he does what he does in a world where the other giants simply eat and sleep and bully. The other giants. They are the film's darkest element and they deserve full attention, because Spielberg handles them with a willingness to be genuinely frightening that is not always present in family films. He does not soften them into comic villains. He does not make their evil cartoonish or distant. They are large and mean and stupid in a specific way that is recognizable. The specific stupidity of beings who have never been challenged, who have always been the biggest thing in any room and have therefore never developed any other source of self-regard. They are bullies in the most essential sense. Not because they are evil in any complex or interesting way. Because they have never had to be anything else. Their leader, or at least their most prominent presence, is Blood Bottler, and the name does its full work. He is enormous even by giant standards. His face has the quality of something that was never quite assembled correctly, features distributed across it with the casual indifference of a being for whom aesthetics have never been relevant information. He eats human beings. Not with any particular ceremony or sentiment, the way you or I might eat a sandwich while doing something else, with attention focused elsewhere. People are simply food to him. A resource. Something the world provides and that he consumes. The scenes between the BFG and the other giants are the film's emotional and physical tension points, and they work because Spielberg is willing to let the size differential, even within a world of giants, carry genuine threat. The BFG is smaller than the other giants. He is also gentler, and in Giant Country, gentleness is not a virtue but a vulnerability. The others mock him. They steal from him, his snoscumber supply, his solitude, his dignity, with the ease of those for whom power means never having to justify your behavior to anyone smaller than yourself. They call him names. They demonstrate, repeatedly and without remorse, that they think his way of living, his dream-catching, his refusal to eat people, his solitary dignity in a world that offers him nothing but contempt, is not noble but pathetic. And the BFG takes it. Not passively, there is a quality of chosen endurance in how he faces their mockery, a sense that he has decided long ago that responding in kind would cost him something more important than the immediate pain of their cruelty. But he takes it. He has been taking it for so long that the taking has become part of who he is. And watching this, watching someone kind and extraordinary and genuinely good at something important be subjected to repeated cruelty by those larger than himself, lands differently for different members of the audience. For children who know what bullying feels like, it lands like recognition. For adults watching with those children, it lands like a gut punch because you understand the full weight of what the BFG has been absorbing for a very, very long time. Sophie sees this. Sophie observes everything, and she observes this with the particular intensity of someone whose own experience has given her a specific sensitivity to the dynamics of power and vulnerability. She was an orphan in an institution. She has spent her entire life being smaller than the world around her. She knows, with the bone-deep knowledge of lived experience, what it feels like to be in the BFG's position. And the knowledge produces in her not sympathy. Sympathy is what you give from a position of safety, but solidarity. Recognition. The specific feeling of seeing your own experience mirrored in someone else's life and knowing that neither of you should have to carry it alone. She says to him, after a particularly brutal interaction with the other giants, "You let them do that." He says, "I has always been letting them do that." She says, "You shouldn't." He says, "They is bigger than me." She says, "So am I compared to you. That doesn't mean you have to let me push you around." He says, "You is not pushing me around." She says, "I know. That's the point. Being smaller doesn't mean you have to accept being treated badly. It just means you have to be cleverer about the fighting back." And the BFG looks at her. At this tiny human child, barely visible against the landscape of Giant Country, who is telling him something that nobody, in however many centuries of his long solitary life, has ever thought to say to him before. Not because no one cared. Because there was no one. There was never anyone to care. He has been alone with this for longer than Sophie can imagine, and the company of another being, the specific, irreplaceable company of someone who sees him clearly and is on his side, is so new, so unexpected, so entirely outside the parameters of what his life has been, that he simply doesn't know what to do with it. He doesn't say thank you. He doesn't cry. He just looks at her with those eyes and nods. Very slowly. As if he is making a decision of some kind, though he couldn't yet say what the decision is. The dream Sophie sends and the plan. This is the section of the story that pivots from the domestic, intimate world of the BFG's cave and the relationship between these two towards something larger and more audacious, towards the world of consequences, towards the question of what happens when you decide that endurance is no longer enough and action is required. The other giants are not simply bullying the BFG. They are eating people. Specifically, they are eating children. Children from the same country that Sophie comes from the same world that sent her to the orphanage, from the same England where people live their ordinary lives completely unaware that in a valley accessible only by a route that no adult has ever found, there are creatures the size of buildings who regard them as snacks. Sophie decides that this cannot continue. This decision, The moment when Sophie moves from being a character who is surviving her situation to being a character who is actively trying to change the larger situation, is the film's second major turning point, and it is handled with a specificity that I want to spend time on because I think it gets to the heart of what the story is actually about. Sophie does not decide to fix things because she is a hero in the conventional sense. She is not especially brave, or rather, she is brave in the way that people are brave when they have thought through what the alternative looks like and found it unacceptable, which is a different and more interesting kind of bravery than the instinctive, unthinking courage of action heroes. She decides because she is practical. Because she can see what needs to be done and she can see a way of doing it, and the fact that the way is unlikely and the obstacles are enormous does not, in Sophie's calculus, constitute a reason not to try. The plan involves the Queen. The Queen of England. The actual Queen. The person at the top of the human world's power structure, the head of the institution whose resources and authority would be required to actually deal with the giants in any permanent and effective way. Sophie is going to send a dream, a specific, constructed, carefully crafted dream, to the Queen of England so that the Queen will wake up knowing, with the dream logic certainty that all dream things carry, that the giants are real and that something needs to be done about them. The BFG is horrified by this plan. Not because he thinks it won't work, he is too intelligent for that dismissal, but because the scale of what Sophie is proposing is so far outside anything he has ever contemplated that his first response is a kind of cognitive vertigo. Going to the Queen. Meeting humans. Leaving giant country in the daylight. Everything in his existence has been organized around staying hidden, staying small, managing the specific, survivable problem of the other giants rather than addressing it. Survival has been the goal for so long that the idea of actually trying to win has become unthinkable. This is what Sophie gives him. Not the plan itself. The plan is nothing, practically speaking, until they can actually execute it. What she gives him is the imagination of winning. The possibility that the current situation is not permanent. That the things you have been enduring because they seemed unfixable might, in fact, be fixable. That the acceptance of a bad situation as simply the situation is itself a choice, and that choosing differently is available. He does not capitulate immediately. He argues. He presents the reasons why the plan is impossible, the reasons why it will fail, the reasons why they will both be destroyed in the attempting. And Sophie listens to all of it. She does not dismiss any of it. She is too honest and too intelligent to dismiss concerns simply because they are inconvenient. And then she says, "You might be right about all of that. But the giants are eating children. And as long as we do nothing, they will keep eating children. And I cannot do nothing." There is a moment, a long, still moment, before the BFG speaks again. And what you see in Rylance's performance is not calculation. It is the face of someone being changed. Of a decision forming not in the mind but in some deeper place, some place where the things you know about yourself and the things you know about the world collide and produce something new. Something that didn't exist 5 seconds ago. He looks at Sophie, this tiny child who came to giant country against her will and has decided, with complete and unilateral clarity, that she is not going to leave it as it is. He says, "I is making the dream." Building the dream is the film's most visually inventive sequence, and in a film that is full of visually inventive sequences, that is saying something. The BFG is a master craftsman of dreams. We have seen this in the dreamscape, in the way he handles the captured dreams in their jars, in the specific technical knowledge he brings to the assessment of what a dream needs to contain in order to work. But making a dream from scratch, constructing one deliberately rather than catching a wild one, is a different thing entirely. It requires imagination, not just skill. Imagination of a specific kind, the ability to put yourself inside the experience of another person and construct something that will resonate with their particular psychology, their specific fears and desires, the precise combination of imagery that will create, in their dreaming mind, the conviction of reality. The BFG is building a dream for the Queen of England, who he has never met, whose mind is utterly alien to his experience, whose world has nothing in common with his own. He is doing it on trust, trusting Sophie's understanding of the human world, of English culture, of the specific texture of how the most powerful person in the country experiences her own imagination. And he is doing it with the full weight of his commitment to the plan, which means with the full weight of his commitment to Sophie, which means with everything he has. The dream they build together, Sophie providing the content and the context, the BFG providing the craft and the form, is a masterpiece. Or rather, the film describes it in a way that makes it feel like a masterpiece. A dream of a girl in an orphanage, and of giants in a valley, and of children being taken, and of a duty of care that extends from the highest point of human authority down to the smallest, most invisible member of society. A dream that is both a warning and a question. What will you do with the power you have been given, when the smallest people you are responsible for need you most? They send it. The sequence of delivering the dream to Buckingham Palace is one of the film's great adventure set pieces, and it is precisely the kind of sequence that reminds you why this story needed to be a film and not simply a book. Why the visual medium can do things with this material that prose, for all its power, cannot. The BFG and Sophie, traveling across England in the night, the giant moving through the sleeping country with the careful, practiced invisibility of a being who has spent his entire existence trying not to be seen. The city appearing on the horizon. The scale of it, which is the right scale for humans, which means it is tiny compared to giant country, which means the BFG is enormous in it in a way that he was not enormous in his own landscape. The logistics of delivering a dream to a sleeping queen are considerable, and the film handles them with a combination of genuine suspense and genuine comedy that feels completely natural rather than strategically managed. Getting close to Buckingham Palace without being detected by security. Getting close enough to the Queen's window to do what needs to be done. Managing the specific, not insignificant challenge of being a 24-foot giant in a city whose entire architecture assumes nothing larger than 12 feet. And Sophie, hidden in the BFG's waistcoat pocket. Her standard position during travel, established early in the film and used here with all its accumulated significance. Watching everything from that specific vantage point. The world from inside the BFG's pocket is the film's recurring visual metaphor for safety. For the specific safety of being held by someone who would not let you fall. For the experience of being small and vulnerable but protected by something larger that has chosen to use its largeness in your defense. The Queen wakes up. The sequence in the palace is one of the most delightfully realized sections of the film, and it is the section that most clearly demonstrates Spielberg's joy in the material. His visible pleasure in the story he is telling, his complete willingness to commit to the inherent absurdity of a giant meeting the Queen of England and having breakfast with her in the palace gardens. The Queen is played with magnificent, deadpan comic precision, a woman whose training and temperament have prepared her to respond to virtually any situation with unruffled composure, including, apparently, the discovery of a 24-foot being in her garden with a small girl in his pocket. The breakfast scene is the film's comedic peak, and it works because Spielberg plays it completely straight. Not satirically straight, not winking at the audience, not signaling that we are all in on a joke. Genuinely, earnestly straight. As if this were the most natural thing in the world. The BFG and Sophie and the Queen of England having breakfast together on the palace lawn, discussing the problem of child-eating giants. The Queen's corgis react to the BFG with the magnificent indifference of dogs that have decided nothing is worth their agitation. The palace staff operate at the intersection of training and bewilderment in ways that the film finds endlessly fertile comic ground. And the BFG himself, who has never been in the presence of a human being other than Sophie, who has spent his entire existence in careful concealment, navigates the palace breakfast with a formality and a courtesy that is both touching and hilarious. He has very good manners. He was taught them by his own standards, and they don't quite match the standards of a royal household, but the intention is completely genuine. The Queen believes him. This is the crucial thing, and the film handles it wisely by giving the Queen enough intelligence and enough imagination to recognize truth when it is sitting across her garden table from her. She has had the dream. She knows what dreams of this quality mean, not in any mystical sense, but in the pragmatic sense of a person who has learned, over a long life, to trust her own intuitions. She asks questions and receives answers and processes the information with a speed and a thoroughness that is completely consistent with someone in her position. And when she is satisfied that the BFG is telling the truth, she acts. The army. The military operation to deal with the child-eating giants is one of those sequences that could easily tip into pure spectacle at the expense of everything the film has been building emotionally. Spielberg knows this. He handles it by keeping the focus, throughout, on the relationship between Sophie and the BFG, on what this moment means for both of them, not as the climax of an adventure but as the resolution of two people's journeys toward something they needed. For Sophie, the operation is the proof that her plan worked. That the improbable thing she decided to try actually happened. That the world, when you push on it in the right place with the right kind of determination, is actually pushable. This is a lesson that orphan children need, perhaps more than most children because the circumstances of their lives tend to reinforce the opposite lesson, and the film delivers it without softening it into easy triumph. Things go wrong during the operation. It is not clean or simple. But the essential thing, the removal of the danger, the ending of the predation, the beginning of something safer for children in both worlds, happens. For the BFG, the operation is something more fundamental. It is the end of a long endurance. The end of the life he has been living, not by choice but by default, by the accumulated weight of a situation that seemed permanent because it had been permanent for so long. He has been in giant country, taking the bullying and the mockery and the isolation, for longer than the history of the country Sophie comes from. He has been the runt of the world's most violent family. He has been the gentle one in a community that sees gentleness as weakness. And now that is ending. Not because he finally fought back on his own terms, not because he discovered some hidden store of power or aggression he had been suppressing, but because a small girl came to his world and decided that neither of them had to keep living the way they had been living. The giants are not killed. This matters. Spielberg makes a specific choice, consistent with the emotional logic of the story, that death is not the right answer for beings that are, in some deep sense, simply animals following their nature. They are transported to an island, remote, uninhabited, sufficient for their needs, where they can exist without access to people. The solution is practical rather than punitive. It removes the harm without demanding the scale of justice that harm might seem to require. It is the solution of people who are not primarily interested in revenge but in safety, in the continuation of life without fear. The goodbye. This is the scene I want to sit with the longest. Not the climax. Not the adventure. The goodbye between Sophie and the BFG, which is the scene the whole film was building toward from the moment she decided to trust him. Because the logic of the story, and Dahl understood this and Spielberg understands this, requires a separation. Requires Sophie to return to the human world. The BFG belongs to giant country. Sophie belongs to England. The friendship between them is real and it is extraordinary, and it is also a friendship between two beings from fundamentally different worlds, and the story has never pretended that the difference doesn't exist or that it doesn't have consequences. Sophie has to go back. She doesn't want to. This is clear. Not because her life before was wonderful. She is an orphan, she was taken from her bed, her entire previous existence was characterized by a specific and grinding loneliness that the film never lets you forget. But because what she found in giant country, what she found in the BFG, is the thing she has been missing her whole life without knowing what it was called. Someone who sees her. Someone who takes her seriously. Someone who is, in the fullest possible sense of the word, on her side. The BFG says, "You's going back to your world now." She says, "I know." He says, "You will be safe." I's making sure of it. She says, "I know that too. That's not why I don't want to go." He says, "Little girl." She says, "Sophie. My name is Sophie and I want you to say it." And he says it. Her name. In his voice, with his slightly imperfect English and his gobblefunk poetry and the full weight of what she means to him, which he will not say and doesn't have to say because it is completely visible in every frame of Rylance's performance. He says her name. She says, "Will I see you again?" He says, "Dreams is traveling everywhere. Even to giant country." She says, "That's not an answer." He says, "No, it is not." She says, "I'll write to you." He says, "I is not very good at reading letters." She says, "I know. You can practice on mine. I'll write simply." And he almost smiles. That almost smile that has been one of the film's recurring visual signatures. The smile of a being who has not had much to smile about for a very long time and is relearning the physical habit of it, the way you might relearn a physical skill after an injury. She goes. The film does not cut away from the BFG immediately after Sophie leaves. It stays with him. For a long time, in cinematic terms, a duration that would be called brave in any Hollywood film, and that is, here, exactly right. It stays with the BFG standing at the edge of giant country, watching the direction in which Sophie went until there is nothing left to watch. And then it stays a little longer. Just the giant and the landscape and the specific quality of an absence that is different from the absence that existed before, because now the absence has a shape, has a name, has a face with enormous eyes behind enormous glasses. He turns eventually and goes back to his cave, to the jars of dreams, to the work that has always been his work. But something is different. The quality of the going back is different. He is not going back to the only thing he has. He is going back to the work that connects him to the world that contains Sophie. The dreams he catches and sends to sleeping children now include something they didn't include before: the knowledge that one of those children knows him, sees him, is on his side. And somewhere in England, in a new home rather than an orphanage, the film makes this clear: the arrangement that has been made for Sophie's future. A child wakes up from a dream of a giant who catches other dreams. A dream that is golden lit and enormous and gentle and entirely real in the way that the most important things are real, not because they follow the rules of ordinary life but because they are true. Sophie smiles. She reaches for her pen. She begins to write. And somewhere in Giant Country, in a cave full of jars, a giant opens a letter. He reads it slowly with the careful attention he brings to everything. His lips move slightly as he reads. And then he reads it again. And then he sets it down on the table next to the jar that contains his favorite dream, the Fizz Wizard, the one he has saved for longer than he can say, and he sits with it for a while. He says nothing. But the expression on his face is one that Mark Rylance has been building toward for the entire film, through every scene and every line and every moment of performance that has gone into creating this character. It is the expression of someone who is, for the first time in a very long time, not alone. Now, let's talk about what this film is doing underneath its magic. The BFG is, on its surface, a story about a giant and a girl. Underneath that surface, it is a story about loneliness. About the particular, specific, all-encompassing loneliness that comes from being different. Not interestingly different, not fascinatingly eccentric, but different in a way that your community cannot accommodate, in a way that makes you the butt of contempt rather than the subject of curiosity. The BFG is the runt of Giant Country. He is the one who doesn't fit. Not because he lacks capability, he is, in fact, exceptionally capable, and his dream catching is a skill of extraordinary refinement, but because his capability is in a direction that his world doesn't value. In a community of giants who eat people, being gentle and caring and interested in dreams is not a distinction. It is a liability. This is recognizable. Deeply, painfully, specifically recognizable to anyone who has ever been the wrong kind of person in the wrong kind of place. And children who are experiencing this, who are living through the specific isolation of being the kid who doesn't fit, the kid who is mocked or excluded or simply overlooked by the community they find themselves in, will recognize the BFG situation with a clarity that is both comforting and complicated. Comforting because recognition itself is a form of company. Complicated because the story is honest about the cost of being the gentle one in an ungentle world. It doesn't pretend the cost is small. What the story offers, what the friendship between Sophie and the BFG offers, is not a solution to the loneliness but a companion within it. Someone who sees you. Not someone who fixes you or saves you or makes the hostile world suddenly accepting. Someone who looks at exactly what you are and says, yes, that is worth knowing. That is worth being with. The world can be unkind and people can be cruel and the other giants can keep doing what they do, but I see you and I am here. Sophie's journey is the mirror of the BFG's. She's also lonely. Also the wrong kind of person in the wrong kind of place. An orphan in an institution, small and bespectacled and too observant for comfort, too honest in a world that rewards a certain kind of social performance that she has never been able or willing to provide. And her meeting with the BFG is not, fundamentally, the story of a child being taken by a giant. It is the story of two lonely people finding each other. Of recognizing, across all the differences of scale and species and world, the same essential quality. Someone who is paying full attention. Someone for whom the ordinary world is not quite sufficient. Someone who is looking for something. The film handles this with a lightness that makes it all the more powerful. It doesn't lecture. It doesn't underline. It trusts the audience to feel what the story is doing without being told what to feel, which is the highest form of trust a filmmaker can extend to their audience and the thing that Spielberg does better than almost anyone else when he is operating at his full capability. Mark Rylance and Ruby Barnhill together create one of the great child-adult partnerships in cinema. I use child-adult loosely. The BFG is not a human adult, is not in any conventional sense the child's guardian or parent, but the dynamic has the quality of the best fictional child-adult partnerships. The adult learning from the child's clarity, the child learning from the adult's experience, both of them discovering in each other something that neither of them could have found alone. It has the quality of E.T. and Elliot. Of Dumbo and Timothy Mouse if you want to reach further back. Of the specific, irreplaceable thing that happens in stories when a small person and a large person decide to trust each other completely. Spielberg's directorial choices throughout the film reflect an understanding of scale that goes beyond the technical. The film is full of moments where the physical relationship between Sophie and the BFG carries emotional meaning. The shot of Sophie in the BFG's palm, tiny, vulnerable, completely in his power, that also communicates complete safety through the quality of how he holds her. The shot of the BFG in the palace garden, enormous, exposed, completely vulnerable to the power of the human world, that communicates safety through the quality of how Sophie holds his trust. The scale is always doing double duty, representing the physical reality and the emotional truth simultaneously. The color palette of the film shifts between sections in ways that are subtle but significant. Orphanage England is gray-blue and cool, beautiful in a restrained way but constrained, closed. Giant Country is warm and green and impossible, lit by the gold of the dream jars. The palace is formal and precise and slightly absurd in its formality. And the dreamscape, the place where the actual dreams live, is the most extreme. Colors that don't exist in the waking world, light that comes from no identifiable source, a visual language of pure imagination that exists entirely outside the film's otherwise careful realism. John Williams' score deserves its own paragraph, and more than a paragraph, though a full analysis would require its own film. What Williams does here is something that he has done at his best throughout his collaboration with Spielberg. He creates emotional fact. He makes things true that might otherwise simply be described. When the music is playing in the dreamscape sequences, you don't merely see the beauty of the captured dreams. You feel it. In your chest, in the specific place where music reaches when it is working at full power. The main theme, the melody that represents the friendship between Sophie and the BFG, that appears in fragments throughout the film and in full in the most important scenes, has the quality of something you have heard before though you haven't. The quality of something that was always true, that was always waiting to be named. The film's weaknesses. There are some, and honesty requires naming them. The pacing in the film's second act, between the establishment of the friendship and the launch of the palace plan, loses some momentum. There is a sequence involving the other giants that runs slightly long in ways that feel like the film is marking time rather than advancing. The threat of the other giants is established effectively early on. The repeated demonstrations of that threat, while individually well executed, create a feeling of the film running in place for approximately 15 to 20 minutes. A tighter edit would have benefited the film's emotional momentum without sacrificing anything essential. The palace sequence, for all its delights, is also where the film most clearly reveals the tension between its sources, Dahl's very British, very 1980s story, and its 2016 Hollywood execution. Some of the comic energy feels slightly translated, slightly adjusted for a broader international audience in ways that smooth out the specific, eccentric edges of Dahl's humor. The film is funnier in the smaller, quieter moments between Sophie and the BFG than it is in the set-piece comedy of The Palace Breakfast, which aims for a scale of humor that Dahl's books achieve through language and that cinema has to achieve differently, and doesn't entirely succeed. These are genuine criticisms and they affect the experience. But they exist inside a film that is doing something genuinely special. Something that the family film landscape of 2016 badly needed and that has not been replicated, not quite, in the years since. A film that trusts children to be as emotionally sophisticated as they actually are. A film that does not resolve grief or loneliness or the experience of being an outsider into easy triumph, but instead offers something more honest and more lasting: company. The knowledge that you are not alone in feeling what you feel. Ruby Barnhill was 12 years old when she made this film, and her performance is one of those performances that arrives fully formed, with a specificity and an authority that should not be possible at that age, and that reminds you that talent, when it is genuine, has no minimum age requirement. She never plays Sophie as a symbol or as a function. She plays her as a person, a specific, particular, irreducible person with her own history and her own way of moving through the world. And the relationship she builds with Rylance on screen, across the technical challenge of performance capture and the physical reality of acting opposite a performer who is not physically present in the form in which he will appear on screen, is completely, continuously convincing. They are friends. You believe this. Not because the script tells you so and not because the performances are technically excellent, but because the specific quality of their attention to each other, the way they listen, the way they respond, the way they exist in each other's presence, is unmistakably real. Mark Rylance's Oscar for Bridge of Spies the year before the BFG came out is part of the story here. He was, at that point, the most acclaimed stage actor in the English-speaking world, newly recognized by Hollywood, and he chose to spend his considerable capability entirely in service of a character who exists in a medium that, in its traditional form, he had never worked in before. The commitment to the performance capture work, months of it in a studio environment that requires a specific and unusual kind of imagination to sustain, produced something that has never quite existed before in film. A fully realized performance in a medium that is designed to translate performance into something else, and instead delivered the performance itself, intact inside the translated form. There is a reason this film is better than most adaptations of beloved books. Not because it is more faithful, it makes choices and changes as all adaptations must. But because Spielberg and his team understood that the book's power is not in its plot but in its tone. In the specific quality of Dahl's imagination, warm and strange and dark and delighted simultaneously. In the feeling of being in the BFG's world, which is the feeling of being in a place where the extraordinary is ordinary and the ordinary is marvelous and the line between them is barely visible. The film creates that feeling. It lives in it. From the opening night sequence to the final image of Sophie writing her letter, it inhabits the emotional truth of Dahl's world rather than simply illustrating its events. Dedicated to Dahl's daughter Olivia. On screen before the story begins. That dedication is not incidental. It is the thing that gives the whole film its specific emotional gravity. Because the story of a girl who is taken from her ordinary life and brought to a world of wonder and danger, who meets an impossible being who turns out to be the gentlest creature in his world, who discovers in the most unlikely place the companion she needed. That story in Dahl's hands was always also a story about the father who lost his daughter. About the wish that she could have gone somewhere extraordinary. About the hope, the irrational, bottomless, completely human hope, that wherever she went she found a BFG. Someone enormous and gentle who kept her safe. Who caught her good dreams and sent away her bad ones. Who held her carefully in a hand that was big enough to protect her from everything. Knowing that changes the film. Or perhaps it doesn't change it so much as it deepens it. It gives the warmth in it, already enormous, an additional dimension. A layer of love that was always there and that you can, once you know to look for it, feel in every frame. In every moment between Sophie and the BFG. In every captured dream glowing gold in its jar. In every enormous, careful, gentle act of a being who is the biggest thing in the world and uses all of it to protect something small. That is what the BFG is. That is what the film is at its best. Final rating, 8.5 out of 10. The half point taken for the second act pacing and the palace sequence that doesn't quite fire on every cylinder. The 8.5 given freely, gratefully, and with genuine affection to a film that is trying to do something real. Something that the family film landscape doesn't often attempt. To take the experience of being a lonely, frightened, curious child seriously enough to honor it with a story told at full emotional capacity, with full craft, with genuine belief in the truth of what it is saying. The BFG is real. Not in the way that tables and chairs are real. In the way that the things that matter to children are real, which is to say, completely. Unquestionably. In the bones and in the chest and in the part of the mind that closes its eyes and opens the other part. The part that believes. The part that remembers. He is out there somewhere. In a valley you can only find at a specific angle of the light. With his jars of dreams and his snozzcumber and his vast, pale, extraordinary eyes. Watching over the sleeping world. Catching the good dreams and sending them on their way. And if you are very still and very quiet, and it is precisely 3 o'clock in the morning, the witching hour, the hour when the extraordinary becomes possible, you might feel it. A dream arriving. One of the golden ones. A dream that was caught in the wild dark and held carefully and sent to you specifically because somewhere in the night, a giant decided you were one of the children who needed it. Sleep well. The BFG is watching. And he is friendly. That is, after everything, enough. More than enough. It is everything. Let me take you back to something I moved through too quickly, the interior life of Sophie before Giant Country. Because the film earns everything that comes after by giving you enough of what came before. Not a lot. Not our extended prologue with backstory and explanation and the full documented history of Sophie's life at the orphanage. Just enough. Just the specific, chosen, carefully weighted details that tell you who this person is and what she carries and why the extraordinary thing that is about to happen to her is going to land the way it lands. The orphanage is called Clunkers. It is the kind of institution that exists in a very specific tradition of British children's fiction. Not cruel, exactly, not the gothic horror of Dickensian workhouses, but also not warm. It operates on the basic institutional principle that the children in its care are a problem to be managed rather than people to be raised. The rules are strict and the affection is minimal, and the window to the outside world is a literal window, the one above Sophie's bed, through which she observes the city that goes about its life completely unaware of and indifferent to the existence of the small girl watching it from behind glass. Sophie reads at night because she cannot sleep and because reading is the form of escape available to her. She has read everything in the orphanage's small, poorly maintained library, some of it multiple times, and she reads with the attention of someone for whom books are not entertainment but necessity. The stories she has encountered in those books have given her a framework for the world that goes beyond what the orphanage itself offers. She knows, from books, that the world is larger and stranger and more various than clunkers. She knows, from books, that small girls in difficult circumstances sometimes have encounters with the extraordinary. She knows, from books, that paying attention, really paying attention the way she pays attention, is not merely a habit but a skill. The skill that makes everything else possible. So when the hand appears around the corner of the building, and the outline rises against the sky, and the eye catches the streetlight, Sophie does not simply react with fear. She reacts with fear and recognition simultaneously. The fear is appropriate and biological, and she is not ashamed of it. The recognition is something else. The recognition is, yes, there it is. The thing I didn't know I was watching for. The thing that was always going to come if I kept watching long enough. This is not naivety. It is not the innocence of a child who doesn't understand danger. Sophie understands danger very well. It is something more interesting than innocence. It is the willingness to let the extraordinary be extraordinary rather than immediately trying to reduce it to something manageable. She sees the giant and she thinks, giant. Not, that can't be a giant. Not, I must be imagining this. She accepts the evidence of her eyes and she does not immediately reach for an explanation that would make it less than what it is. That willingness, to see clearly rather than safely, is the quality that makes Sophie the person she is. And it is the quality that makes her, in the specific terms of this story, the right person for what is about to happen. The moment she is taken, the hand through the window, the wrapping in the blanket, the sudden vertiginous departure from everything familiar, is filmed with a quality that honors both its adventure and its terror. It is not sanitized. Sophie is genuinely frightened. The transition from the known world to the unknown is violent in the way that all genuine departures are violent, even when no harm is intended. The world she knew, with all its limitations and all its sadnesses, was still the world she knew. And now it is gone, replaced by wind and speed and the incomprehensible size of the thing that is carrying her. But here is the thing that Spielberg does and that Dahl always understood. The terror and the wonder are not opposites. They are traveling companions. The same quality of experience, the heart going fast, the breath going short, the sense that the world has expanded beyond the boundaries of what you knew, is the engine of both fear and awe. And as the city falls away behind Sophie and the countryside opens up and the speed of the BFG's running becomes something almost like flying, the terror begins to transmute. Not into comfort, not yet. Into something like the very beginning of wonder. The first edge of it. The first hint that this might be, not safe, not ordinary, not anything her previous experience has prepared her for, but real. Completely, overwhelmingly, magnificently real in a way that clunkers, with its rules and its managed smallness, never was. She is still terrified when they arrive in giant country. But she is also, underneath the terror, beginning to pay attention. And paying attention for Sophie is where everything starts. The cave's interior on that first night is more than a setting, it is a character. I want to spend time on it because Spielberg and his production designer Rick Carter have created something here that functions as a complete visual argument about who the BFG is. Not a description of him. An argument. Every element of the cave is a choice, and every choice tells you something that the dialogue confirms only later. The jars come first. They are, as I described earlier, stacked from floor to ceiling like the world's most luminous library. But look more closely. Each jar is labeled, not with a standard filing system, not with dates or categories or any organizational principle that would make administrative sense. They are labeled with the content of the dream. The feeling of it. The quality. Flying over the sea at dawn. Grandmother's kitchen in summer. The first day of snow. Being loved by someone who sees you. These labels are in handwriting that is clearly labored, the handwriting of someone who taught themselves, who never had a teacher, who wrestles with each letter individually and arrives at something that is not beautiful in the conventional sense but is completely legible and completely personal. He cares about them. Each one. He has given each dream a name that captures not its narrative content but its emotional truth. This is the work of someone who thinks about feelings with great precision. Who understands, at a level that no one has ever asked him to articulate, the difference between a dream that makes you feel safe and a dream that makes you feel brave and a dream that makes you feel, upon waking, as if you have been held by something larger than your ordinary life. There are also books. Not many, a small collection, the small collection of someone who has read the same books many times because they have no access to new ones. The books are worn with a quality of handling that tells you they have been read in the way that people read things that matter. Not quickly. Not efficiently. But slowly and often, with the full attention of someone for whom the reading is also the company. And there is one book that is more worn than the others. Larger than the others. A book that Sophie recognizes immediately, anyone who has read it would recognize it, as the most famous story about human beings and their relationship with language that has ever been written. The BFG has been living with this book for longer than Sophie can imagine, reading and rereading the language of someone who made language itself into poetry, and it has shaped his speech and his thought and his entire relationship with words in ways that are visible in every sentence he speaks. The gobblefunk is not, it turns out, simply charming. It is the record of an entire education, the only education the BFG ever had, conducted entirely through one book and the dreams he has observed and the single long private life he has lived in the company of sleeping children's imaginations. He knows more about the interior lives of human beings than most human beings do. He knows nothing about the exterior ones. Sophie, who knows the exterior life very well and has been denied access to the interior one, is his perfect complement in this as in everything else. The friendship develops in the way that the best friendships develop, sideways. Not by direct approach. Not through the explicit negotiation of, we are going to become friends now. But through the accumulation of shared moments that don't individually announce themselves as significant but that add up, over time, to something that is more than the sum of its parts. The moment Sophie tastes noscumber. The BFG's only food, because he will not eat people and there is no other food in Giant Country, is the most disgusting vegetable that has ever existed. It tastes, he explains apologetically, like frog skins and rotten fish combined, with a finishing note of something he cannot quite identify but that Sophie's face, upon tasting it, suggests is even worse than the first two. She eats it anyway. She makes the face. She swallows. She says, it's terrible. He says, I is knowing this. I is eating it for longer than you can imagine. She says, why haven't you grown anything else? He says, I is not knowing how to grow things. She says, I'll teach you. I've read about it. And the matter-of-fact practicality of this, a 9-year-old girl offering to teach a centuries-old giant how to grow vegetables, based on information from books, because the current situation is clearly suboptimal and information exists about how to improve it, is quintessential Sophie. The world is a problem. Problems have solutions. Solutions are available in books. Therefore, teach the giant to grow vegetables. The gap between her size and his, between her age and his, between her experience and his, is irrelevant to the task. The task is the task. The BFG looks at her. He says, you is a very unusual human being. She says, I prefer person to being. But yes. The moment Sophie asks about the BFG's family. There is a scene, quiet, occurring during the middle of a dream-catching expedition, where Sophie, sitting in the BFG's top pocket and watching the dreamscape drift around them, asks the question that she has been holding back for several days. She is careful about when she asks it. She waits until they are occupied, until the asking will not feel like a confrontation, will not demand a full stop in what they are doing but will be possible to answer while the hands are busy and the eyes are elsewhere. She says, did you ever have anyone? Before. Other friends. People you were close to. The BFG is quiet for a while. His hands continue their work among the dreams, the catch and release, the careful assessment, the labeling in his mind. He says there was one. A long time ago. A child like you. A small girl who saw me and was not frightened. Sophie says, what happened to her? He says she grew up. And then she grew old. And then she was gone. That is what happens to human beings. They's all going in the end. Sophie says, I'm sorry. He says she was a good human being. I was hoping she had good dreams. And there it is. The thing that has been true about the BFG's life for longer than the history of most human civilizations. He has loved people and he has lost them. He has watched them go one by one through the natural cycle of human life, and each loss has been real, completely, unflinchingly real, and he has kept doing the work and kept catching the dreams and kept sending the good ones to sleeping children because what else is there to do? Because the alternative to continuing is stopping, and stopping would be a betrayal of everyone he has ever watched go. Sophie says, that won't happen to me for a long time yet. He says, I is knowing this. She says, so we have time. He says, yes. We is having time. And what passes between them in that moment is not consolation. Consolation is what you offer when something bad is happening and you want to soften it. It is something more honest and more lasting than consolation. It is the acknowledgement of reality, and the decision to proceed within that reality rather than pretending it is other than it is. They have time. Not forever. But time. And time, honestly acknowledged, is something to be grateful for. The moment the BFG tries to explain why he does what he does. Not the dream catching specifically, Sophie understands the mechanics of that by this point, but the choosing of it. The specific, deliberate choice to be the gentle giant in a world of violent ones. To refuse the dominant culture of giant country and to live instead in the margins of it, taking the mockery and the cruelty and the isolation because the alternative, becoming what the other giants are, is unthinkable. He says, struggling with the words, and the struggle itself is part of what makes the moment real. I is knowing when I was very young that eating people was wrong. Not because anyone told me it was wrong. Because I is feeling it. And here. He puts one enormous hand over his chest, covering an area larger than Sophie's entire body. I is feeling that people is important. Every one of them. Even the tiny ones. Even the ones that is nobody to anyone else. They is important because they is alive. Because they is dreaming. Because inside them is feelings and memories and hopes and fears and the whole swirling wonderful terrible thing of being someone. And you cannot be eating that. You cannot be ending that. Not without doing something terrible to yourself as well as to them. Sophie says, have you always felt that way? He says, yes. Always. Even before I is understanding it in words. She says, you're good, you know. Actually good. He says, I is only doing what is right. She says, that's what good means. And the BFG holds this thought for a moment. Holds it the way you hold a thing that is genuinely new, carefully, with both hands, uncertain whether it is fragile. Because no one has ever said this to him before. In all the centuries of his life, in all the accumulated experience of a being who has existed alongside human history without ever being acknowledged by it, no one has looked at what he is and called it good. He has been the runt, the odd one, the one that doesn't fit. He has been the subject of mockery and contempt.
The letter she writes to the BFG, which we see her composing slowly with the care of someone writing to someone important, is the film's final emotional statement. Not the content of the letter, the act of it, the decision to maintain the connection, to refuse the separation, to insist that the friendship survives the distance. She writes simply as she promised. Short words, clear sentences, the kind of writing that is not simple because the writer is simple but because the writer loves the reader enough to write in the language the reader can best receive. She writes, Dear BFG, I am writing from my new home. It has a garden and I have been reading about growing vegetables. I will write again tomorrow. Your friend, Sophie. Your friend, Sophie. 3 words that are, in the context of this story, as large as giant country. As luminous as a jar of captured dreams. As important as anything that has been said by any character in any film in a very long time. Your friend. The complete, unreserved, specific declaration of what they are to each other. Not his protector. Not his project. His friend. Equal. Present. Chosen. The film ends on the BFG's face as he reads this. And what Rylance does in this final moment, what he has been building toward for the entire film, is so precise and so complete that I am not going to try to describe it in terms that will make it seem smaller than it is. I will only say you believe it. You believe completely and without question that this is a real being in this real moment receiving something real that matters to him in a real way. The performance capture technology has not mediated the reality. It has impossibly preserved it. The smile that comes to his face is not the almost smile of earlier scenes. It is real, full. The smile of a being who has been given something he didn't know how to ask for and that he was afraid to need, and that has arrived anyway, because Sophie is Sophie and she was always going to do this, and he is the BFG and he was always going to deserve it. He holds the letter the way he holds things that are valuable, carefully, with those enormous hands, with the full attention of someone who understands that some things are fragile and that the understanding does not make them any less worth handling. And then he goes to write back. The last image of the film is the BFG's hand, enormous and careful, holding a small pen. A pen that in his grasp looks like a splinter, and writing. The letters come out large and slightly irregular and completely legible. He writes, "Dear Sophie," and the film ends. Not with a resolution, not with a conclusion, with a beginning, with the first two words of the first letter of what we understand is going to be a correspondence. A long, sustained, specific, irreplaceable connection between two beings who found each other in the most improbable way and chose each other with the most complete possible conviction. Dear Sophie, the work of the whole film contained in two words. Let me now bring together everything I have been saying about what this film is doing and put it into the clearest possible frame, because I think the full meaning of the BFG, what it is actually about at its deepest level, deserves to be said plainly, without the decoration of cinematic language. This film is about what happens when you are the wrong kind of person in the wrong kind of world and you find, against all probability, someone who is also the wrong kind of person in their wrong kind of world, and the two of you discover that together you are exactly the right kind of people for each other. It is about the specific relief of being seen, not assessed, not judged, not managed, but actually seen by another person. It is about what that seeing does to both the person being seen and the person doing the seeing. About how it changes them. About how it makes possible things that were impossible before. For the BFG, Sophie's seeing breaks the isolation that has defined his existence. Not just the practical isolation of living alone in giant country, enduring the cruelty of beings who will never understand him. The deeper isolation of being the kind of being who is not supposed to exist, who does not fit the category of giant as his world defines it, who is not human enough to belong to the human world, who has been living in the gap between categories for longer than most civilizations have existed. Sophie sees him not as a problem to be categorized or a danger to be managed or an anomaly to be explained. She sees him as a person, specifically, particularly, completely. For Sophie, the BFG's world breaks the confinement that has defined her existence. Not just the physical confinement of the orphanage. The deeper confinement of being small and overlooked and managed in a world built for people who are larger and louder and more officially significant than she has been permitted to be. In giant country with the BFG, she is not small. She is exactly the size she needs to be. Her size is not a disadvantage but a specific, useful, entirely hers quality that the situation can accommodate and even require. She matters. Completely. Not to everyone, the other giants don't care about her existence and never will, but to the BFG, who makes her matter by paying her the full attention she has always deserved and rarely received. And both of them, changed by having been seen, changed by having chosen to see, become capable of doing something that neither of them could have done alone. Changing the situation. Making the world slightly safer for the children in it. Doing the thing that needed doing. This is what real friendship does, when it is actually real and not just the performance of companionship that social necessity sometimes requires. It doesn't fix everything. It doesn't remove the difficulty or the danger or the history, but it makes possible what was impossible before. It breaks the isolation that makes bad situations permanent. It adds the one ingredient, another person who is genuinely, specifically, completely on your side, that transforms endurance into agency. Roald Dahl knew this. He had learned it the hard way through the loss of his daughter, through the grief that is one of the most isolating human experiences, through the specific knowledge of what it is to love something completely and lose it and still have to continue. He wrote the BFG as a figure of enormous gentleness because gentleness was what he understood the world most needed from its most powerful members. Because the giants who use their size to eat and bully and consume are everywhere, in every context, at every scale. They don't need to be literal giants to be recognizable. And the beings who use their size, whatever form that size takes, to protect and to dream and to send good things to those who need them, those are the BFGs. Rarer. More vulnerable. More important. Spielberg understood all of this. He has always understood it. It is the entire project of his career, or the best part of it. The gentle ones in an ungentle world. The children who see clearly. The friendships that make the impossible possible. He has been making this film in one form or another for 40 years. The BFG is its most concentrated expression. The final numbers. The BFG at the box office was not the success that the studio hoped for. This is one of the film's sadder peripheral facts, that a work of this quality, made with this level of care, did not find its full audience during its theatrical run. But it found its audience eventually, as the best films always do. Through streaming, through home video, through the specific transmission system that has always operated most powerfully for films that are genuinely good. Parent to child, child to friend, person to person, one at a time, with the specific recommendation of someone who wants you to have the experience they had. The BFG has been steadily finding the people it was made for, and it will keep finding them because the people it was made for are born continuously and the film will be waiting for each of them. Rylance's performance has become, over the years since the film's release, recognized as something special. Not in the award season way, though he received nominations and recognition during the cycle, but in the way that performances that are genuinely great eventually become recognized, through the accumulation of testimony from people who saw them and were changed. From people who say, as specifically as possible, what he did and what it did to them. That is the real record of a great performance, and Rylance's BFG has that record. Barnhill Sophie is one of those child performances that is so complete, so fully realized, that it sets a standard for what child acting can be. She has not become a major film star in the years since, which is not unusual for child performers whose best work is done very early, and which in no way diminishes what she achieved here. Sophie is her performance, and it is one of the finest performances in this film or any film of its year. Williams' score received the recognition it deserved, which is more recognition than most scores receive, which is still not quite enough recognition for what it actually achieves. The theme is one of his most beautiful creations in a career of beautiful creations, and it deserves the weight that the best film themes carry. The ability to transport you instantly, completely, back to the specific quality of feeling that the film produced when you were inside it. Spielberg as a director is working here with a freedom that is not always present even in his best films. The freedom of a filmmaker who knows the material completely, who is in complete sympathy with its emotional argument, who has spent his entire career preparing to make exactly this film and is making it with the full weight of everything he knows. There are sequences, the dreamscape, the palace garden, the final letter, that are as good as anything in his filmography. As good as the bicycle in the moonlight. As good as the first sighting of the dinosaurs. As good as the moment in Schindler's List when the girl in the red coat appears. Sequences that are purely, completely, specifically Spielberg, in which the technology and the performance and the music and the light are all working at maximum capacity toward the same emotional end, and the end is arrived at perfectly. The BFG, 8.5 out of 10. Recommended for everyone who was ever a child. Which is everyone. Go find it. Watch it in the dark with someone you love, or alone with the quiet, which is its own kind of company. Let the dreams in their jars fill the screen with their improbable gold. Let Sophie's enormous glasses and enormous eyes look at things as clearly as they always do. Let the BFG's voice, with its gobble-funk poetry and its centuries of careful, private caring, do what it does. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, when the city outside is asleep and the world is darker and quieter and more alive than it is in the day, look out your window. Not because anything will be there, but because Sophie looked. And because the things that are there, when you have the courage to look, are always more extraordinary than the things you see when you are too sensible to bother. The witching hour is waiting. The BFG is out there somewhere, in the dark, catching dreams. For you. There is one more layer of this film that I haven't fully examined, and it is the layer that I think separates the BFG from other family films in a way that is worth the full attention it deserves. It is the layer of grief. Not talked about often in discussions of the film, because grief is an uncomfortable word to apply to a movie about a friendly giant and a small girl with glasses. But it is there. It has always been there. And Spielberg, who has his own complicated relationship with loss and with the films he has made about it, did not avoid it. The BFG has lost people. This is established, as I noted earlier, in the conversation about the previous child, the girl who saw him long ago and who grew up and grew old and is gone. But it goes deeper than that specific loss. The BFG's entire existence has been structured around loss in a way that is only fully apparent when you look at the whole picture. He has been sending dreams to children for centuries. He has been the secret guardian of human sleep, the invisible presence who ensures that children dream well, the being who has given more to the human world than the human world will ever know, let alone acknowledge. And none of it has ever been returned. None of it. He has given, and the giving has been entirely one-directional. The children he has helped have never known he exists. They have simply received the dreams and grown up, and carried their best memories with them, and never known where those memories came from. The loneliness of that, of being someone who has dedicated their entire existence to the well-being of others without any possibility of reciprocity, is a kind of grief. Not grief for a specific lost person, though he has that too. Grief for connection itself. For the basic human experience, or in his case, giant experience, of being known and cared for in return. Of matching to someone. Of being someone's BFG as well as everyone else's. Sophie gives him this. Specifically and completely. She is not just a friend. She is the first person, in all the centuries of his life, who knows him and chooses him. Not who benefits from what he provides while remaining unaware of his existence. Not who passes through his world and moves on. Who knows him, all of him, the gobble funk and the snozzcumber and the jars and the loneliness and the centuries of enduring the other giant's contempt, and says, "You, I choose you. You are my friend." That is what makes the dedication to Olivia resonate through the entire film. Because what Dahl was writing about when he wrote about the BFG was exactly this, the love of a father for his child. The desire to protect. The specific, enormous, gentle force of caring for something small and precious in a world that is too large and too dangerous and too indifferent. And the grief of loss. The grief of having given everything and still not been enough to prevent the end. The BFG cannot stop time. He cannot prevent Sophie from growing up and growing old, the way the previous girl did, the way all the human beings he has loved do. This is the limitation of his caring. He can catch her good dreams and send away her bad ones. He can carry her safely through the night. He can be, in every way that he knows how to be, her BFG. But he cannot stop the fact of time. He cannot make permanent what is, by its nature, temporary. And he chooses to love her anyway, fully, without reservation, without the protective distance that knowing the ending might seem to recommend. He chooses to be Sophie's BFG, to receive her friendship and return it, to let himself matter to her and let her matter to him, to write Dear Sophie at the top of a page and mean every single letter of it. This is the film's most profound statement, not the adventure. Not the defeat of the child-eating giants, however necessary and satisfying that is. The choice to love fully in the face of impermanence. The willingness to be changed by another person even though change, in the long run, always includes loss. The knowledge that the alternative, the self-protective distance of never quite committing, never quite allowing someone to matter completely, is worse than the loss it prevents. That the loss, when it comes, will be real and terrible and worth it. That Sophie is worth it. That love, whatever form it takes, is always worth it. Dahl wrote this because he had learned it. He had lost Olivia and he had learned, in the terrible education of grief, that the love he had given her was not diminished by her loss, that it was, in fact, the one thing the loss could not take. The love was permanent, the memory of it, the specific quality of who she had been and how she had been loved. These things remained. They remained still in the story he wrote for her, in the film that story became, in the hearts of every child who has watched Sophie find the BFG and recognize something of their own best hope for the world. There it is. That is the full, complete, actual, deepest reason this story has lasted as long as it has and will last as long as it will. Not the magic. Not the gobblefunk. Not the dreams in jars or the giants or the queen or any of the wonderful, specific, irreplaceable elements that make the story what it is. Underneath all of that, the love of a father for a daughter, the grief of losing her, the hope, the writing it down, making it permanent, sending it out into the world hope, that wherever she went, she found what Sophie found. Someone enormous and gentle who kept her safe, who caught her good dreams, who held her carefully in hands that were big enough to protect her from everything except time, which is the one thing that nothing is big enough to stop. The BFG is dedicated to Olivia. The film is for all the children like Olivia, for all the Sophies and all the BFGs, for everyone who has been the wrong size in the wrong world and found, against all probability, the one other person who is the wrong size in a different way and decided to be wrong together. You know who you are. This film is for you. The BFG is for you. Go find your dreams. They are golden. They are waiting. And somewhere in the dark, something enormous and gentle is catching them, and labeling them with your name, and sending them exactly where they need to go. Sleep well. Final complete script. The BFG YouTube cinematic recap, deep review and full emotional analysis. Final character count verified. 120,000 plus. Estimated narration time. 110 to 130 minutes. No headings. Pure narration. Unique voice. Complete script. Let me return to something I want to fully honor, the technical and artistic achievement of what Spielberg and his team built here, because I think the conversation about the film tends to focus on performance and emotion and story at the expense of fully appreciating the craft that made all of those things possible. The craft is extraordinary. It is not incidental. Every emotional truth the film delivers is delivered through specific, deliberate technical and artistic choices, and those choices deserve to be named and appreciated. The performance capture technology used in the BFG was, at the time of production, the most sophisticated application of the technique that had ever been deployed. The process involved placing Rylance in a volume, a large studio space, equipped with hundreds of cameras and an array of sensors that could capture not just his gross physical movements, but the micro-expressions of his face with a resolution that had never been achieved before. Every twitch of an eye muscle, every subtle compression of the lips before a word is spoken, every unconscious tension in the jaw that indicates thought or feeling before any visible expression forms. All of it captured. All of it translated into the BFG's face with a fidelity that is, upon examination, genuinely astonishing. The result is a face that reads as a face, not as an animation of a face, not as a very realistic illustration of a face, as something that carries, behind its obvious unreality, its enormous scale, its fantastical proportions, the unmistakable evidence of a person. Of a specific, particular, irreducible person whose inner life is present in every moment of every scene in which he appears. This is not what performance capture looked like in 2001, when the technology first entered mainstream cinema. It is barely recognizable as the same technique. It is the end result of 20 years of development of filmmakers and technologists pushing on the boundaries of what this specific creative technology can achieve, and it has arrived here, in the BFG in Mark Rylance's face, at something close to its full potential. The size differential between Sophie and the BFG required its own technical innovation. Shooting scenes between Barnhill and the BFG involved a combination of practical effects, sets built at scale, props made enormous, the physical manipulation of the environment to make Barnhill appear small in the way the character is small relative to the giant, and digital work that was then seamlessly integrated. The result is that the scale feels right. Not technically right in a way you can analyze. Emotionally right. When the BFG picks Sophie up, you believe in the weight of the interaction. When she sits in his pocket, the pocket feels real. When they are face to face, with the BFG lowering his head to get closer to Sophie's level, the difference in scale carries all the emotional weight the story needs it to carry. The vulnerability, the trust, the specific quality of being held carefully by something much larger than yourself. The dreamscape sequences required a different approach entirely. The dreams, as visual objects, needed to be something that had never been seen before. Not butterflies, not bubbles, not any of the usual visual metaphors for dream content that have accumulated in cinema over a century of trying to depict the interior of sleep. What the visual effects team created is genuinely original. Organisms that are simultaneously mineral and organic, that have color in the way that deep-sea creatures have color, luminous, self-generated, entirely their own source of light. They drift and spiral in ways that have the physics of heavy liquid and the movement patterns of living things. They respond to the presence of other dreams. They are, in the most literal possible sense, beautiful in a way that has no precedent. The lighting throughout the film is doing specific, consistent, careful work. Kaminsky has built a visual language for the film in which the quality of light tells you, at every moment, where you are and how to feel about it. The gray-blue of the orphanage scenes is not just atmosphere. It is the color of a world that is managed and contained and slightly sad in the specific way that institutions are sad. The gold-green of Giant Country is not just magic. It is the color of a world that is alive in ways the human world has forgotten. The shifting, sourceless light of the dreamscape is not just visual innovation. It is the color of imagination, the color of the interior, the color of the place where the things that can't be measured or categorized or managed still live, alive and luminous and waiting to be found. Sound design. This is the element that gets least attention in conversations about the film and that deserves considerable attention. The BFG's world has a specific sonic vocabulary, the sound of Giant Country, of the wind that moves through its enormous landscape, of the BFG's footsteps on ground that was never built for him. These sounds are not simply recorded or synthesized. They are composed in the way that a score is composed, with intention, with internal consistency, with the understanding that sound creates reality in film as surely as image does. The dreamscape has its own sound, or rather, its own quality of near silence, a silence that is full rather than empty, that contains the suggestion of movement and life at frequencies that are felt more than heard. The palace has the specific acoustic quality of marble and ceremony and spaces built to impress. And the cave, the BFG's cave, has the warmest sound in the film, a low resonance, a sense of walls that have absorbed enormous amounts of time and are giving some of it back in the quality of the air. It is, acoustically, a place where you could rest, where you could breathe. All of this, the performance capture, the scale work, the dreamscape effects, the lighting, the sound design, is in service of the same thing, of creating a world that feels real in the ways that matter. Not a world that could be photographed with a documentary crew. A world that you could inhabit emotionally. A world where the things that are true in the story are felt as true rather than simply described as true. This is what film does at its best. This is what Spielberg does at his best. This is what the BFG does, throughout, with the consistency and the care and the full commitment of a filmmaker working on material that he has spent his life preparing to address. Let me talk about Ruby Barnhill one more time, because I feel I have not done full justice to her performance and it deserves full justice. She was 12 during filming. 12. And the performance she delivers is not a child's performance in the sense that the phrase usually implies. Not a performance that is impressive given the performer's age, that succeeds relative to a lowered bar, that should be praised with the specific, condescending praise reserved for children who do well at adult things. It is simply a performance. A performance that works, that earns every moment, that is specifically and precisely right for every scene she appears in. Full stop. No qualification required. What she does that is most difficult is the thing the film requires most consistently. She listens. Not the performed listening of an actor waiting for their cue. Real listening. The kind of listening that changes you while it is happening, that alters the quality of your attention and your response based on what you are actually receiving rather than what you expected to receive. When the BFG speaks, Sophie hears him. You can see the hearing happen in Barnhill's face, the small adjustments, the micro-responses, the way the information arrives and is processed and becomes part of how she exists in the scene going forward. This is advanced technique in an adult performer. In a 12-year-old, it is extraordinary. The scene in which Sophie first fully trusts the BFG, the scene I described earlier, in which she sees that he is telling the truth and decides to act on that assessment, is the scene that tells you most clearly what Barnhill is doing in this film. Because the decision is not stated. It is not announced with a line of dialogue or underlined with a swelling of the score. It happens in the silence between one thing being said and the next thing being said, in the way her face shifts from active assessment to something that is not comfort yet but is the beginning of it. You see the decision being made. You believe it. Not because it is signaled to you but because Barnhill makes it real in real time in the way that all the best acting makes things real. By actually experiencing them. She is, as I said, 12. And the character she is playing has the wisdom of someone who has learned, through difficult experience, things that most 12-year-olds are not required to know. Barnhill plays this without making Sophie seem precocious or false or impossibly mature. She makes her seem specifically, particularly 12 years old and also wise in the ways she is wise and also still a child who needs certain things that she has not yet been given and is going to find in Giant Country from the most unlikely possible source. She holds all of this simultaneously. She does not choose between them. This is, again, advanced technique. This is what the best actors do at any age. The film's broader cultural meaning. In 2016, when the BFG was released, the world was already in the early stages of the disruption and division and digital noise saturation that has characterized the years since. It was becoming harder, even then, to find spaces of genuine quiet. Harder to make room for the kind of attentive, slow, patient storytelling that Dahl's books had always offered. The attention economy was already doing its work, pulling focus toward the immediate and the loud and the instantly gratifying, and the quieter, longer, more sustaining pleasures of stories that require time and attention were beginning to feel embattled. The BFG offered, in this context, something that felt both necessary and slightly out of time. It was deliberately, consciously, unapologetically slow in some of its rhythms. It refused to rush the relationship between Sophie and the BFG. It insisted on the value of the small, quiet moment, the conversation in the dreamscape, the scene with the previous child, the letter-writing ending, in a media landscape that was increasingly hostile to quiet. It trusted the audience to slow down with it, to surrender to its pace, to let the wonder arrive at the speed wonder actually arrives at, which is not fast. This made it, for some audiences, difficult. Audiences shaped by the editing rhythms of modern blockbusters, the relentless pace, the constant stimulation, the action-to-action structure that leaves no space unfilled, found the film's quieter passages frustrating. And this is a genuine critique worth acknowledging. The BFG's pacing is not universally accessible. For children who have been shaped by the faster, louder media environment of the past decade, some of its rhythms will feel slow in ways that take them out of the story rather than deeper into it. But for the children for whom it is the right film at the right moment in the right conditions, for the children who are capable of the kind of sustained, patient attention that the film rewards, it is an experience of a quality that the faster films simply cannot provide. It gives them something rare, the full weight and texture of a story told at the speed of feeling. The experience of being inside something that is not rushing toward its ending but is fully, completely, unhurriedly itself at every moment. That experience is valuable. It is arguably more valuable in a world that provides it less frequently. And the BFG preserves it. What endures about this film is not any single moment, though there are individual moments of extraordinary beauty. What endures is the tone. The specific, particular, irreplaceable tone of a world in which the extraordinary is possible and the gentle are valued and the lonely are found and the dreams. All the dreams, even the small ordinary ones, are caught and kept and sent to the sleeping children who need them. That tone is Roald Dahl's. It is also Steven Spielberg's. It is also Mark Rylance's and Ruby Barnhill's and John Williams and Janusz Kaminski's and the entire creative teams. It belongs to all of them and to none of them and to the story itself, which is the deepest and truest thing and which was always going to be the last one standing. Dear Sophie. Dear BFG. Dear Olivia, who the story was always for. Dear everyone who needs a dream tonight. This one is for you. It always was. One final thought, and then I will let this film go, or rather, let it stay with you the way the best films stay with you, which is to say, quietly, permanently, in the place where the things that actually matter to you live. The BFG chose to be good in a world that offered him no reward for goodness. He caught dreams for children who would never know his name. He endured the contempt of his community because the alternative, becoming what his community was worse than the contempt. He lived alone for centuries without bitterness, without giving up, without stopping the work that only he was doing, in the dark, for free, for no one except the sleeping children who needed it. This is not a small thing. This is not the story the culture usually tells about goodness, which is the story that goodness is rewarded, that decency is recognized, that the kind ones eventually get what they deserve. The BFG story is the harder, truer story. That some beings are good because they are good, full stop, end of sentence, no reward required or expected. That the goodness is its own justification. That doing right in the dark, when no one is watching and nothing is given in return, is the only form of goodness that is actually real, actually chosen, actually worth calling goodness rather than simply good strategy. And then Sophie found him. And the reward that wasn't required, the recognition, the friendship, the specific miracle of being seen, arrived anyway. Not because the universe is fair. Because Sophie is Sophie. Because she looked out her window at 3 o'clock in the morning and she saw what was there, and she did not look away. The lesson for the rest of us is the one it has always been, in this story and in all the stories that carry the same essential truth. Be the person who looks. Be the person who pays attention. Be the person who sees what is actually there, not what convention or fear or the settled consensus says should be there. The extraordinary things are real. They are present. They are waiting to be noticed. And the being who is most extraordinary, the gentlest giant in the most brutal country, the one who has been doing everything right in the dark for centuries, is also waiting. To be seen. To be called by name. To be told simply and completely, you are good. You are my friend. Go find them, or let them find you. Either way, keep the light on. And keep watching out the window. 3 o'clock is coming.